Hey, I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today we're gonna make an outdoor lounge chair. It's summertime, and so we get to spend a lot more time in the backyard, and we have a lot of projects that we're gonna do out here, but one of the first things to get ready to use this space more is to make some seating. There's a couple different things I wanna try out here, and so the first one is gonna be a lounge chair. Let's do it. The wood portion of this was made out of 1x4 cedar, and even though it's more expensive than pine, cedar is a great wood to use in outside projects because it resists rot. For the frame of the chair, I used 3/4 inch square tubing. I cut this down on a cold cut saw. This is made specifically for cutting metal. This is not a typical miter saw. But if you don't have one of these, or a metal cutting bandsaw, you could also use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. That's a pretty good way to be able to cut down steel stock. Anyway, I cut all these pieces down to get ready to weld them together, first starting with the bottom frame. I've got all these pieces cut, but before I butt joint them together, I'm gonna go back with the grinder and add a bevel so that there's more surface area for the weld to fill in. That'll make a stronger joint. I used a belt grinder for this, which is really handy because it has a 90-degree plate that you can set the workpiece against. But again, if you don't have one of those, an angle grinder with a grinding disc on it would work great. I used some magnets to hold these pieces at 90 degrees to each other before tacking them together to make sure that they stayed where I wanted them. And after they were tacked in place, I went back and did full welds on all the different sides. I welded these butt jointed together, but if you had cut them at miters, there wouldn't be any open ends. I knew that these open ends would end up being hidden behind other parts of the frame later on. I got this box all welded up and ground down flat. This is gonna be what you're actually gonna sit on. So the next step is to add these back pieces for the chair and then put on the legs. Basically a whole bunch of welding and a whole bunch of grinding, so montage time. I've got the structure pretty much welded up. I think it's good to go. And now I gotta put on some metal pieces to tie all three of these things together. That'll help the back from falling backwards. And so I just gotta set these in place and mark how long they need to be and then cut them off. And then the actual wood armrest is gonna go on top of this. Frame's pretty much done. The welds aren't super pretty, but it works, and I think it's going to be strong enough. So the next step is to get ready to add the wood pieces on the back end on the seat. And to do that, we're going to weld on some of this flat bar across the top and the bottom of each section, and then if it needs it, I'll put one right across the middle as well. So first we got to cut these down to length. I measured out the size of piece that I needed, and then decided to cut all of these at once. The metal cutting bandsaw is pretty great because it's quiet and there are no sparks, but again, cutoff wheel and an angle grinder will do the same job. I clamped these pieces in place and started by tacking on the corners to make sure that everything stayed where I wanted it. If you put too much heat in one place, it'll start to warp the metal. So by tacking it around and making sure it's secure, you can go back and fill in full welds without worrying about it deforming. I welded these in place well enough that they stayed where I put them, but also kind of leaned on the fact that they are a little bit flexible. This will give a little bit of bounce, but also support the seat of the chair. And then of course, once they were welded in place, I went back and smoothed out as many of the welds as I could, so it looked good for paint. Theoretically, I think I have all the welding done, but I do want to make a little point here. Welding is one of those things that you kind of have to practice, and I don't do it often enough to get good at it, and so every time I come back to it, I feel like I'm starting from scratch. But if becoming a welder is something that you want to do, just realize it does take a lot of practice, and you have to be kind of dedicated to learning all the stuff about it. Alright, the frame is all done. Now we got to cut down the 1x4 cedar strips to put in both of these sections, so let's go cut those down and then we'll dry fit them. I know it looks like I planned this out, but I actually didn't. I figured I would have to cut one of these to make sure that they fit all the way across, but the width of the chair was actually perfect for 5 boards. I used a scrap piece of square tubing to find the placement for this wooden board for the armrest, and then marked the section where it would need to be cut away to fit around the frame. I also matched the angle of the back of the chair and then cut out each one of these notches with a handsaw. This video is sponsored by KiwiCo, and they make super awesome hands-on projects that kids can work on to learn all about STEAM. That's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. They've got different crates geared towards different interests and different age groups, and since we have 4 kids, we get several different boxes. In fact, our kids change interests from month to month, so they go between the koala crate, the tinker crate, and the kiwi crate. It changes all the time. Each one of these crates has all the things that you need to make a project, as well as instructions written specifically for kids, but it's also a lot of fun to help them with the projects. And the projects are all over the place. Some are about art, some are about technology, and some are about both. This is actually a spin art thing that my son made, and he had to figure out what a resistor was so that he could put this part together. These crates come as a subscription, so you sign up and then every month you get a new crate in the mail and you don't know what's inside. My kids are constantly asking when the next one's gonna show up. These things are a whole lot of fun, and it's a great way to engage kids and get them doing something that's hands-on. I guarantee your kids are gonna love it. Go to kiwico.com/makestuff and sign up, and you'll get your first month for free. Thanks, KiwiCo. I sanded all these pieces smooth, then I rounded over some of the sharp edges with a sander. I laid all the pieces out in the chair and got even gaps between each one of the pieces and the outer frame. Then I used a chalk marker on the frame to figure out where to drill some holes in the back of these pieces. I laid on a scrap piece of MDF inside the frame and drilled holes through the MDF and through the steel, matching up with all the marks that I had made. This MDF then became a template that I could move on to each one of these flat bars and drill the same hole pattern. The one mistake I made here was that I only used a center clamp, which means the template shifted a little bit, so not all of the holes were in line. Using 2 clamps would keep it in place just fine. I also drilled some holes in the armrest brackets to hold those pieces of wood in place. After a little bit more sanding and grinding, it was ready for paint. And as usual, I went to my go-to spray paint. But instead of normal spray paint, I used enamel paint. This dries to a much harder shell and will last a lot longer. And I know black seems like a bad idea to have outside, but you shouldn't actually come in contact with much of the metal, other than underneath your knees. After a couple of coats of paint, I laid on the pieces of wood and got them all lined up with the gaps even in between them. I used some clamps to hold them in place on the brackets and then flipped the chair over. From the bottom side, I drove in some short screws to hold these into the bracket. I drove a screw into the top and then one into the bottom so that the piece wouldn't twist when I put all the rest of the screws in. This made sure to keep all of the gaps on both ends the same. I did the same thing for the back panel, and it was finally starting to look like a real chair. In fact, I kind of liked the way it looked without the wooden armrest, but it really needed it for comfort. I lined them up just as I had done before and drove in screws from the bottom side to lock them into place. And these ended up being way more secure than you might have expected. And finally, I finished this off with a really thick coat of tung oil. Something like polyurethane would put a coating on the wood that may make it last even longer outside, but cedar's gonna do just fine with some oil. And I love the way it makes the wood look. Now if you remember, there were still some open holes in the top edge of the back frame. And to fix that, I pulled a tip from my good friend Jimmy DiResta and cut down a couple more blocks just slightly bigger than that opening. I hammered those blocks into the hole so that they were flush, and then put on a little bit more oil. These will keep rainwater out, which will stop it from rusting as quickly, and it'll keep bugs from moving into the inside of the chair, which would be bad. After that, it was all done, so I took it out to its final spot in the yard. So this thing turned out pretty cool. I really like the combo of the black and the cedar together. And I will have to add some oil to this to keep it in good shape, but I think it's gonna hold up outside pretty well. The angles of chairs are really specific to how you're gonna use the chair, what type of thing you want it to be. And in this case, I wanted it to be a lounge chair, and I really just guessed at the angles. It did work out pretty well, although it could be a little bit taller, so I could lean my head back. That'd be kind of nice. Anyway, if you're gonna make a chair, do some research and find the right angles for the type of chair that you're gonna make. I'd love to know what you think about this project. You can let me know down in the comments, and I've got lots of other types of videos you may be interested in. Check those out, and don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. If this is something you're wanting to do, just realize that you're gonna have to put some time into it, you know, over the lost my train of thought.